Seeing our limitations differently comes from being open to the process of exploring different perspectives. And I brought a piece of art with me today that really exemplifies this power of seeing what's in front of us in a different way. First, let me explain a little bit about how the art is created. So I've always been fascinated by light and shadow. I love how the properties of the distance of the shadow from the property of the distance of the object, its closeness to where the light source is, can change the properties of the shadow. Like with this pair of scissors, if I hold it close to where the shadow is, you can see that the shadow is crisp. But as I bring it further away, it gets fuzzy. What this essentially means is if I put splotches of paint on this sheet of plexiglass, we can quite see that there. Depending on where I hold it, I can decide if I want the shadows to be crisp or fuzzy. So in a roundabout way, this simple little discovery allows me to paint with shadow. When we are confronted with a challenge, whether as an artist like me or from a place of business like you, our success depends on our ability to shift how we see what's in front of us. Like right now, let's see. Oh, it doesn't look like much, right? It's kind of pretty. Little shapes in there. But if I shift our perspective, if I turn this around, we get an entirely different picture. Thank you. And the woman in the picture here is Frida Kahlo, and I really suggest that you check her work out when you get a chance. You know, sometimes we're a lot closer to a solution than we think, even if it doesn't appear that way. You know, when I think back to my 3 years away from art, away from my dream, just going through the motions, instead of looking for a different way to continue that dream, instead of looking for a different perspective, you know, I just quit. I gave up. And what if I didn't embrace the shape? Doing so wasn't just about art and having art skills. It was about life and having life skills. Embracing the shake is about building our foundational skills so we can untap our potential when we need it most. So we can always find our way to that story of transformation. The journey to finding transformation really forced me to rethink my whole approach to limitations. And I've since come to realize that when we change the way we look at a limitation, it changes how it affects us. If we run into a limitation and we see it as a roadblock, it prevents us from seeing the possibilities. But if we choose to embrace limitations, it opens us up to new opportunities. But, of course, realizing this alone doesn't help us change. In order to change our paradigm about limitations, we must first understand the nature of the limits that are holding us back. After all, running into limitations is not a new phenomenon, is it? No. It's really a phenomenon of life, that at every turn, at every point in our lives, we are constantly confronted with limitations. Yet, unlike playing a sport or an instrument where we get better with practice, most of us tend to get a little bit worse with each limitation we run into, because we expect them to be awful and unpleasant. And so we try avoiding them at all costs. But it ends up costing us our future, our potential, and certainly our happiness. In trying to better understand the mechanisms that would allow one person to transform a limitation while someone else struggled, I decided to do an art project. And this is what artists do when we ask these big life questions. And I decided to do another one of those really large-scale text art pieces like that circle piece from earlier. They've become a complete fascination of mine over the years. For this one, I wanted to run a Kickstarter campaign to fund the creation of a short documentary about the piece. So I posted my phone number online, asked people to call me and tell me about a limitation that they faced. I spoke with people from England, France, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Hong Kong. There were over 30 countries in total in every single state in the United States. And as the piece was in progress, CNN reached out and asked if I'd write an opinion piece about the experience, but at that point I had more questions than I did opinions. After an entire month of handwriting, I found myself staring at the sea of stories. There's over 1,000 handwritten stories in this piece. And as I went through the motions of wrapping up the Kickstarter campaign, overseeing the creation of a short documentary and sending out all the rewards, I began to pore through the stories, looking for patterns. I called people back, I discussed their stories in detail, and slowly I discovered that the key to think about a limitation lies in the distinction between a limitation and a self-limiting belief. To put it simply, a limitation is something that's been put in our way, whereas a self-limiting belief is something that we have put in our own way. And it's important to distinguish between the two because a limitation is, after all, simply an obstacle. There's still paths around it. There's still room for possibilities. Whereas a self-limiting belief blocks all paths and doesn't allow for possibilities.